Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Campbell, and I am the Assistant Director for the National Adult Protective Services Association, and I'm happy to welcome you all to today's webinar, which is the ACL, Administration for Community Living, pilot project on the implementation of the Voluntary Consensus Guidelines for state adult protective services systems. And just a quick disclaimer, this presentation is provided in support by the Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services, Administration for Community Living, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services by New Additions Consulting, Inc., under a contract. The contents of this presentation do not necessarily represent the policy of OEJ, APS, ACL, or HHS, and readers should not assume endorsement by the federal government. All right, before introducing today's speakers, I'll provide some information regarding the technology that we're using for today's webinar. All attendees are automatically muted, so please write in any questions or comments that you have in the questions box that's located in your webinar panel that popped up to the right of your screen. Questions will be monitored and read aloud for presenters to address at the end of the presentation. We are recording today's webinar, and the recording will be posted to NAPSA's website, and an announcement will be sent out once that happens. Additionally, a PDF of today's slides will be available with the recording on the NAPSA website once that video is posted. And today we have a few presenters here with us to talk about this topic. So first, we have Stephanie Whittier-Eliason, who is an Aging Services Program Specialist with the Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services with the Administration for Community Living. We have Mary Toomey, who is a consultant on Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services with New Additions Consulting, Inc. We have Anna Leopold, who is a Senior Project Manager with New Additions Consulting, Inc. We have Lori Delagrammaticus, who is the Executive Director of the National Adult Protective Services Association and will be helping me out with monitoring the question and answer towards the end. We have Kendra Keene, who is the Policy Analyst at the National Adult Protective Services Association. We have Tammy Sieber, who is the Adult Protective Services Social Services Chief at the Aging and Disability Services Division with the Nevada Department of Health and Human Services. Robin Tejada, who is the Adult Protective Services Quality Assurance Manager, Aging and Disability Services Division, Nevada Department of Health and Human Services. Kelly Cordell, who is the Director of the Adult Advocacy Division with South Carolina Department of Social Services. We have Brandy Nehrud, who is the Director of Policy and Program Oversight with the Adult Advocacy Division with South Carolina Department of Social Services. And then a couple more. We have Michelle Gayette, who's the Assistant Director in the Aging Services Division with the North Dakota Department of Human Services, and Sharon Jackson, who is the Program Director for Adult Protective Services, Office of Aging and Adult Services with the Louisiana Department of Health. And so, without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Mary, to get us started.
Yeah, thanks so much, Karen, and welcome everyone. We're really happy that all of you have joined us for this webinar on the Technical Assistance Project. I've worked on lots of projects in my career. This was probably one of the most fun, most interesting, and I think most impactful. So the purpose of today's webinar is to talk a little bit about what is ACL's vision for adult protective services, and and the guidelines and this TA project. So this is kind of the why have guidelines, why have a TA project related to the guidelines. That we wanted to introduce you to like the WHO, the Technical Assistance Project team, which was comprised of folks from NAPSA and New Additions Consulting, and of course working in partnership with the state, with all of the state people. So that's the sort of who of it. Then we're going to talk to you a little bit about that. How did we do this? How did we provide the technical assistance? What was the strategy? What was the approach? An overview of the projects and the different methods. And then, of course, most importantly, what happened as a result of this technical assistance project to help states align their practice with the voluntary national consensus guidelines. And We then are going to leave time for all of you for questions, but that's kind of it. The why, the who, the how, and the what of this really interesting and impactful project. So where we want to begin is, what was ACL's vision for the guidelines, for adult protective services, and then specifically for this project? So I'm really happy to turn it over to my friend and former colleague, Stephanie Whittier-Eliason.
Thank you, Mary. Everyone can hear me, yes?
Yes.
Perfect. Always have to do the sound check. So the next slide, please. Perfect. So I have been asked to set the context for this project and explain how it fits into the larger vision that ACL has for elder justice, and more specifically for facilitating the further development of a national adult protective services system. We've taken a couple of steps that we hope sort of forge in people's minds the idea that ACL is the home for the federal home for adult protective services. In 2014, we established the Office of Elder Justice and Adult Protective Services. So it's the first time that a federal office has officially had Adult Protective Services in its name. We started in 2015 a national APS Technical Assistance Resource Center that we've been working closely with NAPSA over the years to make sure that the work that we do in the TA Center and the work that NAPSA does as an advocate for you all and representing a membership organization is complementary. In 2015, we also began our project to establish the National Adult Maltreatment Reporting System, which is the first data system to nationally collect information about elder abuse, neglect, and exploitation as it is reported and investigated by APS. And in addition to that, so we facilitated the development of the voluntary consensus guidelines for state adult protective services systems. And this was in response to requests that we had from states about what would be really helpful for them in making change in their states, would be something from the federal government that the states could point to and use as support. So I'm going to get into that a little bit on the next slide, please. Okay, so what is the goal of the APS guidelines? I'm sure if you're on this call, you're pretty familiar with the guidelines, but I just want to remind folks of a few things. The first thing and most important thing is that the guidelines are considered aspirational in nature. We know at ACL, and the field knows, that not every state is able to align their practice with every one of the domain elements or the guidance that's in the guidelines. But we offer it as a goal, as an objective for us to work towards. We know that there's statutory limitations, there's political limitations, there's regulatory limitations. We understand that. But overall, the purpose is that we move collectively towards an environment where individuals receive similar protections, similar types of service deliveries across the country, regardless of where they live in, regardless of the county. We're not trying to make everybody equal the same, as in, like, we don't want to ignore, you know, state laws and state policies and what works in one locale. But what we want to say is that just because you live in one location, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't receive the same level of quality service. APS has striven for that for a long time, but with a lack of resources and a lack of guidance or a lack of support that they can point to, your programs haven't always been able to kind of get the momentum that was needed to make the changes that you all have seen and recognized and brought to our attention. The most important thing is that these are not regulations. If states choose to implement them or not is totally voluntary. It's up to them. There are no benefits afforded you for saying that you're consistent with the guidelines or not, unless there in the future there's some funding opportunity that would say that, but that's highly unlikely because that's sort of considered like an unfair advantage, but we won't get into that. Anyway, so there's no stick and no carrot other than the desire that we all have as professionals to make sure that what we do is the best that we can do for people. Next slide, please. So getting a little bit deeper is that the guidelines were divided into 7 thematic areas. We call them domains. And within that, they actually, we have subdomains or sub-themes. It just made more sense in organizing how APS practice is done and how, and so that folks could go to the guidelines and identify the areas that they felt that they were ready or wanted to work on. And it was just easier to kind of filter it, and it made more sense. So those are the 7 that we'll be referring to during the presentation today. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over before I get to the end to Mary to ask a few questions of you all, and then I'll pick it back up after.
Thanks, Stephanie. It's really important to sort of relate the rest of what we're going to talk about to ACL's vision. And sort of similarly, we wanted to give you all a chance, and then this poll question, which we'll have on your screen in just a second, is one of 3 that we have sprinkled throughout the session. They're totally anonymous. Your answers do not reflect your IP address or anything like that, but we're really curious, how has your state aligned part or all of its APS policies, practices, its APS manual with the guidelines? So maybe some of you don't know the answer to this, so maybe you wouldn't participate, but if you do know the answer, we really encourage you to participate. Yes, we have aligned all of our policies and practices with the guidelines. We've aligned some of our policies and practices with the guidelines, or no, we have not aligned our policies and practices with the guidelines. The next polling question will ask you for some of the barriers you may have encountered if your state has not yet had a chance to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Karen, who will activate this poll and ask everyone to please participate. Again, it is anonymous.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. I am launching that now. So you all should see that poll on your screen. In order to answer the question, just click the little circle to the left of the statement. And I'll leave this open for about a minute and let you know. I'll give you a heads up before I'm going to close it. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll. And then share those results.
That's great. It's what I would have expected, and kind of goes to a little bit about what Stephanie was saying about the aspirational nature of the guidelines, that while some states, a quarter of all states, have aligned all of their policies and practices, 63% are in the process of doing that. Some of them, some of the guidelines may be aspirational and they might be striving to reach them, but 63%, so that's 88% of all states have done something related in whole or in part to the guidelines. And then so let's go to the next poll question, Karen. I don't need to introduce it. When we have it on the screen, I'll talk to people. In the next poll question, you can check all of these. So if your state hasn't had a chance to bring your policies and practices into an alignment with the guidelines, check all the answers that apply that you may not have had the time or you didn't have staff to dedicate to the effort. You didn't know where to start, or the guidelines just have not proved helpful to your state. You can check 1, 2, 3, or 4 of these. And so this poll is now open. Again, your answers are anonymous. We can't tell what state you're from or who you are. We appreciate your participation. There was, at one point, I wanted to have one of the options be what guidelines, but people thought that probably wasn't a very good idea. But I do think that we want to acknowledge that there might be some states that the press of business is just so like, wait a minute, there are guidelines? How? Oh, that's right. So
Mary, we did get one comment that there may be counties in a county-based system that are aligning their practice and internal guidelines to the ACL voluntary consensus guidelines, but not the entire state. So we did not mention that.
that's a really, really excellent point. Thank you, Lori. Next time we do this, we'll have to account for the variation that might occur in a county-run state program. Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and close that poll. And then as soon as the software catches up with me, there we go, sharing the results.
So also, it's very encouraging to see that states are not saying that the guidelines just aren't helpful. So
I agree.
ACL is very happy right now,
Woo!
as are all of us who believe that the guidelines provide a framework for creating a evidence-based APS practice. So the reason we put this poll question here is we agree with you that what I think you'll hear from the 4 states is that they would have, I'm going to put words in their mouth, you guys, when it's your turn to talk, please agree with me or disagree with me, that I suspect that you might all say, the 4 states we ended up working with, that they had not been able to find the time, that they had not been able to dedicate staff to a process like crosswalking their APS policies and procedure manual to the guidelines, or they just did not know where to start. So this is really helpful to see that this is what other people listening in are thinking. I think that was the experience of the 4 states we worked with, and we're going to let them give tell you more about what their experience was. But first, I'm gonna then turn it back over to Stephanie to talk a little bit about the purpose and goals of the Technical Assistance Project.
Great, thank you. So there we go. Next slide. There it is. So I think we put the poll where we did because it really feeds into why we did the TA project. I think that it's more obvious now coming after those questions. So with a lot of the work that we did within the Office of Elder Justice and APS, we were able to measure what is the impact, what is the difference that we're making by doing that. When we have the NAMERS data, we can see how many more states are reporting or how many more data elements we have. When we have grant programs, we can assess what did those grants achieve and what changes are we making because of this investment. The National Voluntary Consensus Guidelines, though, was a bit more tricky. So what difference did it make to the field that we had done this? We heard there was a desire for it. We had a ton of participation. But really, so what? What difference did it make? How has it changed things? Do states even care about it? So while we were getting these questions, we had those questions ourselves. We were also wondering, well, what have states done? And if, we hear they're not really doing it, so why? What are those challenges? And can we maybe come up with an idea of how to assist those states, or not just those 4 or however many, but any state, in aligning their policies and program with the consensus guidelines. So we envisioned created a TA project, technical assistance project, to figure out what is it that we can do? What is it that the states need help with? What are those issues? And can we come up maybe with some models of technical assistance to states that that may be more likely to be quickly successful and beneficial rather than a longer term process? We don't, as you all know, we don't have the kinds of resources to invest in really in-depth, long-term technical assistance dedicated. However, we can and we do a lot of shorter intervention technical assistance. So how can we maximize that type of technical assistance in terms of a short-term goal? And then also, what are we going to see about needs that might be midterm goal or long-term goal in terms of technical assistance? So that is how this project came about. It's really to tell us the so what about the guidelines and how can we help states get more aligned with it. So with this, I am going to turn it over to Anna, who's going to kind of get us more into the actual project.
Thank you, Stephanie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. As Stephanie mentioned, I'll tell you a little bit more about who was involved in the project, just so you have a sense of, I know everybody's speaking today. So the project, this pilot project was funded through a contract by ACL with New Additions Consulting. New Additions, we are a small woman-owned business, and our work focuses on children and youth, aging, disability, and health, among other things. So we were really tasked with kind of conceptualizing the project and then helping to implement it, and then managing all the different aspects of the project. So we partnered with Mary Toomey, who you may know is an expert in elder justice and adult protective services, and then also the National Adult Protective Services Association, NAPSA, which most of you probably know. So Mary and NAPSA really helped with actually implementing the technical assistance with the states. So on the NAPSA side, Laurie and Kendra really worked with the 4 states that were selected for this pilot to come up with the goals, and then to provide assistance to the states to help address their goals and develop specific products and language for their manuals, APS manuals. So we at New Additions, we really helped kind of with logistics and just managing all of those aspects, and then also did some evaluation of what actually occurred and what are some of the outcomes were from the state's perspective. So how satisfied were the participants with the TA they received? Was the TA helpful? So we wanted to make sure that the efforts we were implementing actually were helpful to the states. And then we had 4 states that actually participated in this pilot: Nevada, South Carolina, North Dakota, and Louisiana. And they will tell you more about their specific experiences in a little bit. Okay, so I'll turn it over to Kendra.
Good, thanks, Anna. So I'm gonna review some of what we did, particularly at NAPSA, on the TA strategy and approach. And I will say, on the first point, ideally we're going to meet with states in person, and we did meet with 2 of the states, I believe, in person, but as you all probably know, the distancing and COVID struck right at the beginning of this project. So it really was an interesting pivot, and I want to applaud all 4 states for just sticking with us and for their flexibility there. They were definitely awesome. And so for these meetings, whether they were in person or virtual, we did them, you know, via video, so we could at least get a little bit of that. We met with the state APS administrator, as well as anyone else identified by them. You'll see as the states talk about their work that they identified different members of their team, partially based on the specific subject matter they were interested in. And really, I think this buy-in and the broad support was key to success, and bringing in those who would be the lead of the particular parts. And during that meeting, we also discussed kind of what the goals were. You'll see that different states were at different places. As we saw in the poll, over half of you have aligned some of your policies and practices with the guidelines already. So you may have just wanted to identify one of the domains that Stephanie talked about, and you'll see that in a couple of states. Or another, you'll see South Carolina took more of a full comparison approach. We did what we call a crosswalk, comparing the policies and procedures of the state with the guidelines, whether that was a full comparison or you know, just a particular domain that was identified. So then once the states identified their particular area they wanted to work in or develop or have TA for, we worked with them to develop SMART goals. If you're not familiar with these, SMART goals are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So specific goals are really, you know, those simple, significant goals that really get at what you want to change, not just, oh, we want to make our program better, but what exactly, like we're going to look at our QA process. And measurable, as Stephanie was talking about, trying to get at that evaluation aspect. How do we know it was changed? Achievable is, of course, we want the goal to be attainable. We want you to be successful. Relevant, is the goal realistic? How does it relate to the guidelines? And then time bound, we looked at short-term, intermediate, long-term goals. So that was, the short-term goals were really what the TA centered around, the 3 to 6 month goals. But also we developed with the states intermediate goals, which were 7 to 12 months, and then more long-term goals, which were 13 to 18 month goals, you know, things that might require more buy-in from the system. And so along with those goals, we worked on developing the possible products to meet the short-term goals. As we talk through the states, you'll see there's a mix of both internal products, changes to the policy manual or specific tools to help workers along with training, and then some external products, you know, like fact sheets on, you'll see Louisiana developed some fact sheets. And then of course, to go along with that, we help work with the states to develop work plans. And the goal of the work plans is really to identify the steps, the products, and most importantly, the responsibilities, who's doing what. And of course, all of these, the work plans, the goals, were approved by the states receiving the TA. And really, as I said before, the buy-in is essential. Karen, next slide, please. So then once we identified the goals, we really got down to doing the work. And on the NAPSA side, we helped collect a lot of the existing resources out there, what other APS programs are doing. Is there things we can adapt? Definitely don't want you to have to reinvent the wheel. And also some things on what's going on outside of APS. You'll see some things drawn from like the American Bar Association, particularly around supported decision making. And then as well as, working with the states on what policies and procedures and reviewing their manuals and statutes. And from that, we developed the TA content and products with a lot of feedback from the state teams, and some of them, the states themselves were responsible for. This was informed by the research, and then some of, what we found from outside programs were adapted to align with state requirements. You'll see like the findings matrix developed for really, aligning what that state statute is. And the goal of these products is also to be able to build on them for the intermediate and long term, and really to make sure that they were useful. These aren't products we want to sit on a shelf. We want them to actually be useful. And then one of the other things you'll find that a few of the states are going to talk about is, you might find you need to bring in someone else from another department, or for example, your legal counsel was one that was brought in for a couple of the states to really make sure some of the language complied with the statute and would stand up for, if you have to take the case further. And then the products were revised based on any feedback and finalized, like I said, whether it was feedback from the legal counsel or whether it was feedback from other members of the state team saying, oh, this won't work for our state, or this, we can't get there yet with this, but maybe this is a long-term goal. And then finally, going back, New Additions performed an evaluation of the TA and the usefulness of the TA, as Stephanie noted and others have noted, really trying to understand the difference this makes and how we can go forward in providing TA that's really useful to you all. And I'll turn it back over to Mary to introduce the states.
Thank you so much, Kendra. It was a bit of a dream team, this group of people, with the technical assistance being provided primarily by Kendra and Lori from NAPSA, with support, infrastructure, and sort of a framework designed by New Additions, with the input of ACL throughout. But the most important part was the work done at the state level. So I'm going to introduce the good folks from Nevada in a second, and I'll introduce each state as they're ready to speak. But I did a little review, and I just wanted to say how impressive the 6 people we're about to hear from are. I added up that between all of them, they have 132 years of experience in state government. And the other thing that was true of all of you, I'll speak directly to you all now, well, it was just that it was such an impressive group, but that you have come to roles of leadership rooted in work that you did starting as line workers, which I think really speaks to, it speaks to perseverance and dedication and all those good things, but it also speaks to the kind of leadership you bring, recognizing that you remember what it's like to be a worker. It's not, and so that I think accounts for some of the success that this project shared. So let me go to the next slide, where you get to see the pictures of lovely Tammy and Robin. So just a little bit of bio for Tammy Sieber, who is the Adult Protective Services Social Services Chief for the Aging and Disability Services Division at the Nevada Department of Health and Human Services. Tammy has a Bachelor's of Art degree from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and she is also a licensed social worker. She has been with the state of Nevada Aging and Disability Services Division for 25 years. She's also a certified person-centered thinking trainer and is also certified as an instructor for the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Violence Against Women Enhanced Training and Services to End Abuse in Later Life program. Tammy serves as the NAPSA Regional Representatives Advisory Board, on the NAPSA Regional Representatives Advisory Board. Also from Nevada is Robin Tejeda. Robin is Adult Protective Services Quality Assurance Manager for the Aging and Disability Services Division of the Nevada Department of Health and Human Services. Robin has been with the state of Nevada's Aging and Disability Services Division for 15 years, and she has been the APS Quality Assurance Manager since June of 2017. In her role as APS QA Manager, she identifies areas of needed program improvement and continues with the development of the QA program for APS. She has an extensive background in the area of quality improvement and federal and state regulations. Prior to her role in quality assurance, she worked as a social worker supervisor and a case manager for the Aging and Disability Services Division, their community-based care unit, for 13 years. She was also part of the APS Harmony Database Core Work Group for Nevada's 2016 ACL APS Enhancement Grant Project, and she is currently part of the 2018 ACL Enhancement Grant Project. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Tammy and Robin to the project they had in Nevada.
Okay, thank you, Mary. You can go to the next slide. I first wanted to say that Nevada was proud and to be contacted to participate in this TA project. So what happened when we were first, when I was first contacted, I had met with Robin Tejada and Stephanie Snyder, who's with our QA unit. And we looked at the guidelines to see what kind of improvements does our unit need to make. And I don't know if everybody knows kind of the uniqueness with Nevada is we're not by county, we're statewide. So we have offices in 4 regions of the state. So Las Vegas, Carson City, Reno, and Elko. And I am based in Las Vegas, and Robin with the QA is in our Carson City office. So I just so happened to be up in Carson City that I could meet with Robin personally. And we sat down and we looked, like I said, looked at the guidelines. And so we decided, when we thought about what problems do we see a lot of people having people struggling. And the one thing that we looked at was we realized with the consistency and substantiating cases, either substantiating or not substantiating. So we had originally picked that as our main thing that we wanted to work on. When Mary and Lori came to Las Vegas, we were one of the lucky ones that got the in-person thing. It was just start of COVID, where there was, I remember we were no handshaking, we were all hitting elbows, which, is really hard for social workers, I think, because we're touchy-feely people, we like to hug, so that's kind of difficult. So when we met in Las Vegas, I had also included Kim Craig, who is a social work supervisor with APS. And I also included Elizabeth McCurdy, who is my social service manager for the southern part of the state, who currently right now is managing the northern part too, because we don't have that position filled right now. And Kim had brought up one that she sees a lot of staff struggling with when they go out and see somebody and the client clearly needs services, especially medical attention, and they appear alert and they're refusing it, but what do we do in that circumstance? There was a lot of questions whether, with the self-determination, do you just leave somebody in the state of medical concern and walk away, or do we have to reach out to medical personnel? So those were the 2 topics that we chose to work on with this project. And I am going to now turn over to the next slide, and Robin will give you some information.
So Tammy gave you a little background of how we came to identifying some areas of improvement. And I have to back up just as a second and talk about when I first came on board in 2017 with working with adult protective services, coming from the CDC world where everything's pretty laid out. You know, there's federal guidelines, there's state guidelines, there's just all sorts of guidelines, and you have to follow them. And so when I first started training and getting to know the APS program more intimately, I was like, wait, what? There's not like federal guidelines that you have to follow. And so I was very impressed when I started Carrie Embry, the chief prior to Tammy. She gave me the APS manual and the voluntary consensus guidelines, and I went through them. And I noted quite quickly that, you know, that a lot of those guidelines had been crosswalked, if you will, using Mary's language into their manual. So when Tammy approached me and was like, "Hey, what do you think? What this is? You know, we've been approached to be part of this TA. What do you think?" And I, you know, as we discussed at lunch that day that she talked about, we identified that area of determining if maltreatment had occurred, and then later the voluntary services implementation that Kim suggested. Because I'm in a unique situation with my coworker Stephanie to be able to see cases statewide. And we were looking at cases and being like, what, wait, these cases are identical, but the substantiation is much different depending on worker, supervisor, region. And so our goal with this was to hope that statewide, that everyone's determining findings in a consistent manner. You know, it's so important that everybody's kind of on the same page. So our goal was to look at those situations of, you know, showing up to a door and somebody's refusing medical attention, that similar situations, workers were making a similar decision. And so that's kind of what our key goals was, to, you know, consistency statewide in those two areas. So I will hand it back to Ms. Tammy. And next slide, please.
Okay, so thank you very much. So as you can see here is basically kind of what we did with this TA is that we wanted we created the guiding principle. We wanted to look at the guiding principles in regards to determining a consistent manner in our substantiation. Just like Robin said, you know, we could have two cases the same, two different social workers, but yet two different allegations. Were they substantiated or not substantiated? We created a guidance on APS role when the clients who are in crisis refuse services. And what we actually ended up doing was we were able to come up with a consistency of findings matrix, the guiding principles, and a decision tree. And we've had the opportunity to provide a presentation for the APS supervisors, but we have not, because of you know, COVID and things with, we've had most people working remotely. We haven't been able to do the training yet for our APS workers, but we do have that on the calendar for this month, I believe next week, that we will be providing the training for all our APS workers. We have licensed social workers, and we also have investigators who we call adult rights specialists, who do investigations of self-neglect, and we call the less complicated cases of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, where they would do an investigation that would not involve law enforcement or any mental health in the client or person of interest. And you know, I'm really excited to be able to get that training out and really see how helpful this is going to be for our workers. So, Robin?
Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button. Just to go over one of the bullet points here of how we're still in the process of determining how APS workers currently handle situations. My coworker and I, Stephanie, we went through and took a random review of closed cases for FY20, and we actually used the findings matrix that was created for this project. And we went through, and I went through each case and looked at it based on the matrix, if it was substantiated correctly or not, if the allegations were correct or not, just based on the notes provided in the system for those cases. And we're done with that. We reviewed about 120 cases, and so now we're gonna turn that into some data. And the point of doing that is after we have everyone trained and everyone's working with the findings matrix and the decision tree as well, we will do another random review of closed cases. And then also with the decision tree to see if it's working well for us. We did a survey at the beginning before the training, and then we'll give it some time with people working with and using the decision tree after, and then we'll do another survey and then compare the results. And like Tammy said, because of COVID, we had to keep having to back up the training. And so next slide, please. We're still in what worked well, but what we can speak to, we are in the beginning stages. And what's worked well so far is with training with the supervisors based on the matrix and the training that was developed for this. We are able to see even between supervisors, the way things are looked at are so different, and having that dialogue with the training, I think really helps, because some people are like, wait, no, this would be this, and this is how I do it, and then someone else will be like, no, this is how we do it. So to provide some clarity statewide, and after that initial training, Tammy and I had a conversation, and we came up with the idea of once a month we're going to review a case and see how each supervisor would substantiate or unsubstantiation, or what allegations they would choose in those cases to investigate, to have more dialogue in regards to that, because I think everyone kind of gets off on their own. And I spoke to it at our TA project when we were together, and I call it folklore, like folklore is created. And so, we have this great, beautiful manual, but someone interprets it one way or another, and then they're out there creating folklore that's not based in the policy. So I think those open dialogues and just speaking to each other on a regular basis in regards to substantiation decisions, I think is going to really help. So that's something that came out accidentally from the training. And so we're looking forward to training the supervisors, and it's next week. We just kept having scheduling conflicts, and it's kind of difficult because everyone's working from home. I try to schedule that digitally, but we're doing it, and we're hoping for the best. And then Tammy and I spoke about what worked well is having the right people at the table. And I really appreciate that Tammy identified quality assurance as being someone that was important to have at the table, because we have a different perspective than those that are managing the program. And then to have the supervisor and the manager at the table was really great, because I think we had some really great dialogue and produced some really quality tools for our staff use. So that's all I have. Tammy, do you have anything else?
Well, thank you very much. And I just wanted to again say thank you, to Mary and to Lori for all your help, and for New Additions for reaching out to us, Nevada, and asking us to be part of this. It was just really exciting. That I've been with our agency for 25 years, and I started out as a community-based care social worker, and moved from that to being an ombudsman to we had elder protective, then we got authority to become adult protective. And it's just exciting that the little Nevada Protective Service program that I started with gets involved in these things and people reach out. It means a lot to us, and I just wanted to thank, and it's always a pleasure to work with Mary and Lori. So thank you.
Oh, thank you guys. Thanks for the shout out. Just completely made my day. This is Mary. And Anna, I want to maybe take a moment here. Did we talk about in the beginning how the 4 states were selected? So I just don't recall.
We did not talk about that.
Do you want to just take a moment to just let people know? I thought maybe it would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So I'll try to keep it short so not to take too much time away from the other states. But basically, together with ACL, we came up with an approach for selecting the states. So we first wanted to make sure that there was a need in the states we select for making changes to the guidelines. So we worked with Dr. Julie Bartlett. She did a survey in 2018 asking all the APS program directors how they have used the guidelines and whether they have used them. So based on some of the responses that states made on that survey, we looked at states that had already made some efforts in implementing the guidelines, but were still interested in changing additional policies and procedures. And then we had we sent out a brief survey or screener to those states to get some more information, especially in terms of their ability to actually commit to this project, because it is, it was short turnaround time. It was still somewhat, they had to make some commitment in terms of timing and effort. So we wanted to make sure that states had the capacity to actually participate over the few months that we had. So based on that, we actually had the 4 states that participated that kind of came out of that screening process.
Thank you. I just wanted people to understand how it was that we ended up working with these 4 states. That we just there was no favoritism involved or anything like that. But thank you, Anna. Let's go to the next slide, Karen. We can go to the slide with the pictures of the team from South Carolina, and I have the pleasure of letting you all know a little bit more about them. So Kelly Cordell is the director of the Adult Advocacy Division at the South Carolina Department of Social Services, where she manages the Adult Protective Services Division and the Domestic Violence Program. She has served in this role for approximately 5 years and has worked at DSS for the past 17 years in numerous management roles. Before that, Kelly worked as a social worker for more than 25 years in South Carolina, from serving as an advocate at Sister Care to establishing the Stop Violence Against Women program at the South Carolina Attorney General's Office. She received her master's in social work from the University of South Carolina in 2002, and in 1994 she received a Bachelor's of Arts in Public Affairs from Columbia College, and she's also a graduate of the 2004 Leadership Columbia program. Working with Kelly is Brandy Nayrud. Brandy is the Director of Policy and Program Oversight for the Adult Advocacy Division. She manages the policy development and review process, training initiatives, and the domestic violence program. Brandy has worked for the South Carolina Department of Social Services for 19 years in various divisions. Most of her professional career has been in the area of program development. She earned her master's degree in social work from the University of South Carolina in 2000 and her undergraduate degree in social work in the University of North Carolina at Charlotte in 1998. She is also a South Carolina State Certified Project Manager. So let me turn it over to Kelly and Brandy.
Hey, so first I want to say how thankful we are in South Carolina to be selected to participate in the Technical Assistance Project and how valuable this process has been for us. The entire technical assistance team were open to hearing our thoughts, and they were most helpful in helping South Carolina set our short and long-term goals. And they were also most patient and sympathetic when we lamented over our lack of resources. But the exciting part about this project is that we were able to accomplish a good deal but not just thinking about what we don't have, but thinking about how we can make a difference with what we know and what we have and the guidance that we've been given. So that's the next slide. So the approach we took was to, first and foremost, we began by asking ourselves, what do we believe the South Carolina Adult Protective Services program should look like? It kind of evolved over time and from something that the community decided that it should be. So we asked ourselves, where will we begin? And so this is one of the reasons why we asked for a complete crosswalk with the guidelines and our policy, because we really wanted to start at the very beginning. So this second thing we asked ourselves was, to what degree does our policy and practice need to be aligned with the guidelines, so that we can make the policy and practice changes in South Carolina. We talked about, the principles that should guide the APS program, and that how we have never really, they were in my head, but of course never really verbalized, what are the principles, how should we be looking at the work that we do? And then of course the last thing is, with what messages and concepts do staff need the most direction? So we began with, it doesn't cost us anything to change our mindset. And so we took a look at we wanted to look at the work that we do in a different light, because we work at the Department of Social Services and child welfare is front and center. I think that's how we began treating adults like children. And we didn't think about their right to self-determination. We didn't think about their autonomy. We have some oppressive laws in South Carolina where law enforcement can actually take adults off the street and put them into protective custody. And so, whereas I can't change all that right now, we had to look at it, what pieces can we change? What change can we affect? And, that's what we've been tasked with. And we're hoping and grateful to receive the technical assistance and helping us, not just change the work we do, but just change the mindset that we have. So this is, really where TA aided us, and not only using less oppressive language, but to rewrite our policy and to train our staff about the role in adult protective services in South Carolina. So the next slide. Thanks. Okay, so our key goals. So we began, like I said, we began at the very beginning, and we started with, not only did we want to change our written materials, but we want to change the way, we want a paradigm shift. We want to change the way we think about the work that we do and the work that we've been tasked with, that's so important to South Carolinians. So we knew we had to do it hand in hand to look at our policy, our mindset, our training. So we began with developing an ethical framework for practice, and we actually made that chapter 1 of our policy. We also developed a framework for who are we. That's one of our biggest problems in South Carolina, is that the community has forced us into being who they want us to be, and our staff also, has also bought into that. So we've become more of the welfare agency. Let's scoop the folks off the street who have any type of issues or who we don't want living next door to us. So we really wanted to, look at vulnerability and maltreatment, and look at, a standard of evidence. And lastly, our key goal is we incorporated supported decision making into our APS policy, and I didn't know much about that until we received technical assistance, and I was really excited to see that this fits right into our mindset and the direction that we're going. So we were really excited to do that. We've gotten ourselves in trouble in South Carolina by forcing folks into our protection. And so we want to begin changing that and to begin looking at supportive decision making and looking at self-determination. So for our outcomes, what the more concrete outcomes that we came up with from all this thinking we did, Brandy Narode is going to tell you about those.
Thanks, Kelly. Next slide. Okay. So from these goals, we produced several outcomes. The first of which was we developed our code of ethics. We adopted the code of ethics from NAPSA, and we focused on the idea of self-determination as we developed this code of ethics. And then we took that and formalized an ethical framework in our policy by using that and further defined who we were. The next thing we did was work with ACL and our legal team to create a standard of evidence matrix that also outlines who we serve. And in South Carolina, by the way, our standard of evidence is clear and convincing. The third outcome included identifying where we could incorporate supportive decision-making language throughout our policy. And kind of tied with that, our last one was we will be including supportive decision-making scenarios in our APS certification training. Our hope here is that case managers will be familiar with this way of thinking from the very beginning. So next slide, please. So throughout this process, what worked well? First thing we did was we included our agency director and our legal team from the very beginning of the project. Having their support has been invaluable. For example, we relied heavily on our legal team when we were creating our standard of evidence matrix, and as we were and are still making changes to our policy. The second thing, we identified a small core team to work on this project. Having a small team helped us stay focused and our work intentional. But it's real important if I guess my advice would be if you are going to identify a small team to work on a project like this, that you make sure that you have the right people at the table. Anybody that deals with policy or program development or your major program decision makers need to be represented. And finally, the last two kind of go hand in hand. We knew going into this project, as Kelly kind of mentioned, that we needed to look at a new way of doing things, but we weren't exactly sure what that was going to look like. We had a really, and again, I'm going to give a shout out to the project team. It was a very cohesive team. We just felt, South Carolina felt very at ease being able to discuss the issues that were unique to our state, even the issues that we might not be so proud of. So I think going into this with an open mind and being very comfortable discussing all of our issues just really helped us keep an open mind and allowed us to think of the new ways that we wanted to do things. So that's all we have from South Carolina. So I'll turn it back over to Mary.
Yeah, thank you both very much. And I would say that I like very much the last point you just made, which is we were asking states to really make themselves a bit vulnerable with the technical assistance delivery team. And a shout out to both the folks at NAPSA and the states where people took that risk and said, this is something we know we want to change this. This is something we want to change. And, that's not easy to do. So just a shout out to all the states that we worked with, because you all did that in some way or another. And I would also say that it was in South Carolina that we had what I feel like was the longest Zoom call on record. It had to be like 4 hours long. I was, so this is now, we've moved into COVID, and except for the visit to Nevada, all this technical assistance is being delivered by phone or by Zoom or some combination. So anyway, let's go to the next slide, because I then have the pleasure of introducing Michelle. So Michelle Gayette is the Assistant Director with the North Dakota Department of Human Services, the Aging Services Division. Michelle has worked with the state of North Dakota for 22 years, the last 9 overseeing the Vulnerable Adult Protective Services Program. In her current role, she also oversees the Guardianship Establishment Fund. She is also the designated legal services developer and helps to oversee the Aging and Disability Resource Link. Because you don't have enough to do, Michelle, running Adult Protective Services. Michelle is a licensed addiction counselor and has a bachelor's degree in addiction counseling and a master's degree in management. And it was just so much fun to work with you, Michelle. Let me turn it over to you. You may be on mute.
Now, can you hear me?
There you go. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I had myself muted twice because if it wasn't already crazy enough working from home, we've added a new dog to our house. So we have a puppy. And so, we're having lots of fun. So yeah, in North Dakota, just to give everybody a little bit of a heads up about what North Dakota looks like, I always say we're just here to make everybody else feel good, but we're a small state and we are a small staff. And so in North Dakota, we have 17 investigators statewide. We go by regions, and there are 8 regions in the state. And I have roughly 2-ish, let's just call them 2 people for intake. So we have a central intake line where it's staffed by 2 people. And then I have the 17 investigators, some of them contracted staff and some of them state staff. And I'm feeling like I'm just loving other states, hearing other states where they have like all sorts of people to help. Well, in North Dakota, it usually falls to me with adult protection, which is fine because it's a passion of mine. And so this project came up like at a really good time for North Dakota. I was finally getting around to update the policy and procedure manual, and I had wanted to do this for a long time. And I thought, let's apply and let's get some help for North Dakota in making sure our manual, our policy and procedures match as best as possible for what North Dakota can do, the ACL guidelines. And so we did an internal review. I should start at the bottom, I guess. I had 4 staff. I asked my staff, who has time to step up? Because as you can imagine, when there's only 17 of them, it's a little hard to do extra projects on the side. But 4 of them stepped up, and it was a great mix of an intake worker, a brand new APS staff, and then 2 kind of more seasoned workers, both contracted staff, actually. And so they stepped up, and we did an internal review of our policy and procedure manual, and then identified 3 sections for what we wanted to do for updates and for part of the crosswalk. And it was in our policy manual, it's providing APS, talking really about immunity from liability, and then just some program reporting requirements. And those are kind of really weird titles, but they really tie in a different way to the ACL guidelines. And so just a shout out again to my regional staff, and I know they're not on the phone call, but they were just instrumental in moving the project forward. And I know they were a great help in the meetings with Lori and Anna and Kendra, and of course, shout out to Lori, Anna, and Kendra from NAPSA for all of the work that they did with me on this, because when it's one person and then the 4 helpers, it's a lot of work. And so I really appreciate that. And go ahead, next slide, if you would, please. And so for our key goals, we wanted to clarify, we wanted a more targeted crosswalk, I guess you could say. And so we wanted clearer guidance on what evidence to collect and when to support the allegations so that the findings are determined in a consistent manner statewide. And we've kind of done some little bit of internal things with that, but we really wanted to focus on that so that we're all kind of substantiating in the same manner and seeing things in the same way. And so we focused on the determining if maltreatment has occurred, involuntary intervention, and then closing the case. And that one we're still kind of working on. But we want to talk about, our goals were to create a guidance for APS workers on, again, what to collect for evidence, when to support, what was our level of allegation or our level of substantiation, I should say, looking at the client's level of impaired capacity, and then providing guidance on case closure policies. We did a couple intermediate goals as well to really talk about service planning, and that's something we're working on still. And then, of course, we also did a consistency of findings matrix, which is part of our short term, but it's also a long-term goal. And then we wanted to do another follow-up to see if our consistency of findings across the state were more in tune after we instituted the consistency of finding matrix and did a little training on it. And then we recently, I went to the last NAPSA in-person training, and part of that was on QA, and I heard Arizona speak about their QA policy, and I decided why not add more to North Dakota's plate and do a QA, internal QA, and so we're going to add that to our policy as well. And I have one of my intake staff has stepped up, thank God, and is offering to do all of that QA for me, which is fantastic. It's a small start, but it's better than what we had. And then our long-term goal is to implement some training for trauma-informed care to really focus on the needs of our staff and thinking about organizational trauma and how do our policies and procedures then line up with those. And go ahead with the next slide, if you would, please. Thank you. Sorry, my phone's ringing. So what we did, training on the consistency of finding matrix for North Dakota is going to be completed. We have every other week we meet individually or as a team in North Dakota, and that's on one of our scheduled meetings coming up. We meet by teams, and so it's just going to be one of the things that we do, and then we're going to look forward to tracking our outcomes from there. One of the biggest things that we got out of this, I work a lot in the guardianship world, but it's not always familiar to our staff in terms of a guardianship decision tree. And the newer staff and some of the contracted staff that were somewhat newer, but not really said, this is important to us to know what are our steps, what are the alternatives to guardianship, what should we be looking for, because this should be a last resort for the people that we work with, really thinking about, like someone else on the phone call talked about, supported decision making. And how do we start at the very base level, respecting their rights to self-determination, and then move up from there in terms of what's the next step here, and then what's the next step following that, and how do we make a decision that guardianship is absolutely the only thing that's possible in this case in order to protect the client. And that guardianship decision tree not only went to our APS staff, but our entire statewide aging staff. So our staff of over 100 got this guardianship decision tree because it not only affects adult protective services, it also affects all of the home and community-based service workers and everyone that's in a home helping individuals in the state of North Dakota. And I cannot tell you how many people reached out after I sent that out and said, this is amazing. This is the best thing that we could have had. And they really appreciated this. So not only did it improve APS in the state of North Dakota, it's improving the entire aging services process. And then the work in progress, Lori and I are still working to do a case closure policy and really give a guideline to staff. If you've done X, Y, Z, you have done everything that you can in this case, and you should be able to close the case, because there's a lot of staff who take a lot on themselves, as I'm sure you all experience this in your states too, and think that they're the be all and end all, and they're the ones that can help this client and really keep working longer than they should. And so really giving them some detailed guidance on when is it time to close the case. And so that's a work in progress, but we're working on that. Next slide, please. And then what worked well in the state of North Dakota, again, the regional staff were engaged from the start, and they took a very active role, not only from reading our current policy and procedure manual to identifying what they saw as gaps in our process, and then they were involved in all of the phone calls and reviewing the documents that went out to the state. And they've been involved even further after, just to review and say, you know, as a staff member, I would think this would be beneficial to me, and then they can help sell it to the other staff. You know, I'm sure you all realize when you implement something new, it's scary, and if there's guidelines or timelines put on it, sometimes people balk and say, I can't do that. But really having staff say, this is amazing, and this really helped me, and I got it so much more when we worked together and went through this consistency of findings, it has been a huge benefit. My legal advisor reviewed my policies and procedures, and he'll continue to review them to ensure compliance both with state law and with just in North Dakota as general overall, what we do in the state of North Dakota. Again, the staff worked in partnership with them to create the documents, and then we're just planning for continued further changes, especially on the case closure. And so it just really went well in North Dakota, even though we were a Zoom team meeting kind of TA. It was fantastic. We made it work, and it's been so beneficial to the state. And I'm going to turn it back over to you. That's really quick and easy on North Dakota.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And last but not least, we are going to go to the next slide for the state of Louisiana. We almost didn't work with the state of Louisiana, and so I'm really glad that we did, Sharon, and that you're here to tell us a little bit more about that. But let me tell you all a little bit about Sharon. Sharon Jackson is the Director of Adult Protective Services for the Office of Aging and Adult Services within the Louisiana Department of Health. She received a Bachelor's of Science in Social Work in 1995 from Southern University in Baton Rouge. Sharon has 26 years of experience protecting vulnerable elders and adults with disabilities from abuse, neglect, and exploitation. She began her professional career as an APS specialist during an internship program. And then by dint of hard work and professionalism, she has advanced through the ranks to the position of Director of Adult Protective Services in 2012. Ms. Jackson was recently selected as an ambassador to the department's Health Equity and Action Team. In addition to her work in Louisiana, Sharon is also actively involved in advancing the protection and advocacy of vulnerable elders and adults with disabilities at the national level. In 2016, she was selected by ACL to work on a technical expert panel for the finalization of the Voluntary Consensus Guidelines. And she also serves as the Southwest Region representative to NAPSA. So Sharon, over to you.
Thank you, Mary. First of all, I want to thank ACL and the TA project team for selecting Louisiana to participate in the pilot project. As you mentioned, Louisiana initially withdrew from the project just due to administrative and logistical challenges presented at the onset of COVID-19 mitigation activities. So, at that time, just given all of that transition associated with COVID-19 mitigations, we did not think we could move forward with the project. But after further consultation with the TA project team, Louisiana made that pivot that Kendra Keene mentioned earlier. We made modifications to our guidelines, our work plan, and decided to focus our work on responding during community emergencies. Very fitting for the time and circumstance. So Shannon Ianu, who is the assistant director, and I determined our immediate needs, specifically intended to address response during COVID-19 mitigation, and also our future goals. So in addition to Shannon Ianu, I pulled our APS supervisors. They were very instrumental in working to review products. They helped to customize forms and tools, and they also provided the information sharing and community education associated with those products developed. So I want to recognize those persons. They are Christy Robinson, Anona Bowie, Tracy Bordenave, and Valerie Harding. So I really appreciate their work on this project. And I want to mention, I think the TA had goals of, focusing the implementation of the guidelines, but there was an additional consequence. It helped to promote teamwork. I've heard some of the other presenters mention it during the presentation. So at this time, we were, as we all were, we were in the middle of a crisis. COVID-19 just kind of dropped, and we were working to organize our operations. So this just seemed very compatible with the atmosphere that we were under. So I think, just the pivot to a more practical focus helped us move through the project. So let's talk about our key goals. Our short-term goal was aimed at responding to the pandemic and other community emergencies. As many of you may know, South Louisiana was impacted by a very significant hurricane in the recent week. And so along with the COVID mitigation, we are also working to address issues of the hurricane. So it's a very timely and appropriate implementation of the guideline. Okay. So let's talk about the short-term goal just a bit more. I want to share with you the products that were developed under the short-term goal. First, we developed a comprehensive plan designed for promoting our operations during this period. We also took a look at safety, worker safety during an infectious disease outbreak. We addressed worker stress, including how to better support workers. And we also developed information for the public about how to access APS and available community resources, and also tips and guidance for how to support the well-being of vulnerable adults during COVID-19. Our intermediate goals are related to just our overall response to community emergencies. So we are working to align our policies and procedures with the guidelines in respect to that. We also hope to assess the impact of the products developed during this period, especially as they relate to safety and worker well-being. We envision conducting a staff survey to help determine that. And finally, our long-term goal includes the comprehensive assessment and alignment of Louisiana's policies and procedures with the recommended guidelines using the developed TA crosswalk. Okay, so outcomes included, and we learned some things throughout this process, and we really got a better and heightened awareness of the issues of the client and worker safety and vulnerability during the emergency. I think in APS we tend to focus primarily on the client, but during COVID we realized that we needed to pay more attention to the safety and vulnerability of our staff during this period. The other outcome involved the establishment of a framework for communicating service gaps and program needs to upper management, especially for regulatory and statutory updates needed for the comprehensive alignment. It gives more weight to our request. So we're very excited to have that framework available for communicating those needs. And it also helped to facilitate resource and information sharing with our community partners and the public. So, as a state agency, our community relies on our guidance, and so this helped to further that as we move to address issues of COVID, and now, of course, issues of the hurricane. So what helped to produce the results throughout the project? It was very important for us to have the support of LDH leadership and staff participation. Buy-in at every level is essential to achieving the comprehensive implementation of the recommended guidelines. It takes support and approval of certain changes, and of course it takes our staff's involvement and participation in making those implementations work. Secondly, the ease of resource development by the TA experts. We could not have done this without their expertise. Our participation primarily involved the review and customization of the work products developed by the TA team. So once those products were sent to us, we immediately reviewed them. We made them appropriate for our state, following our guidelines, our policies, and of course our state laws. And it made the work more manageable for staff. So that in itself was very beneficial to the success of our participation. And also having the crosswalk tool available for future independent work that will help us further align our policies and procedures with the recommended guidelines. That has been extremely helpful, and we see that as the catalyst for achieving full comprehensive inclusion and alignment of all of the recommendations.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Sharon.
Just in closing, I want to mention and make available to the listeners on the call, the TA products produced are available at LDH website, and it's ldh.la.gov. And if you select Aging and Adult Services and click on Adult Protective Services, you'll find a copy of all of the resources. So feel free to download them, use them, and I'm sure ACL will probably ask that you, if you use them, please include the disclaimer if you choose to use those. Some of those titles include Physically Separated but Socially Connected. It provides tips and resources for supporting the well-being of vulnerable adults during the COVID-19 emergency, tips for reducing stress in the face of COVID, and worker safety during home visits. So all of those resources are very helpful. They've been helpful to our staff, and I believe that they will be helpful to yours as well.
Thanks so much, Sharon. And let's go to the next slide. Or there you go. So the last bullet on this slide, I'm sure that many of our participants are interested in the products from all of these TA projects, are going to be able to be shared with APS programs all around the country. They are in the process of being approved and made 508, so they're 508 compliant, so they're accessible to all users, and they will be put up on the Adult Protective Services Technical Assistance Resource Center website, and we'll send out a shout out to everybody when those are available. You know, this was just a slide sort of concluding some of the lessons that we took away from all of this, but that it seems like APS programs are ready and eager to look at the guidelines and make changes to their policies and procedures to be more in alignment, and that the TA team really felt like one of the goals that they had, or one of the roles that they had, was basically carving out space for states to look at their programs differently. I'm not going to go into this slide because I'm really eager to get to the poll slide, which is our final poll. We're coming right down to the end of our time together. So if we could go to the next slide, Karen. So because we really wanted to see also, if available in the future, would your state be interested in receiving technical assistance, your state or county, let me be clear, to help you with your aligning your APS policies and practices with the guidelines. So you can activate the poll and yes, please, or not sure. I lost the poll there. Maybe, you know, we already done the work, or no, we wouldn't be interested. Take a moment and give us some indication if this is something that your state or county would be interested in doing. I feel like one of the things I heard today for the first time is that in addition to the intentional goals of the TA project, that there were lots of positive unintended goals that came about as well. New relationships that were built with stakeholders in your departments, or new teamwork, a spirit of teamwork that was fostered. That was really excellent to hear.
Mary, this is Lori. While we're doing the poll, I'd just like to make a clarifying comment, or the consistency of findings that we did with a couple of the states. I need to give a shout out to California, because we essentially adopted and adapted something that they had already produced and customized it for the states that we were doing TA with. But I do want to make sure that that team in California gets credit where credit was due. And a number of the other products were adaptations going forward. So in some cases, we were really using what was already out there that we knew about, and we did try to give credit where we could.
Thanks, Lori. All right, what are our results from our poll, Karen?
All right, I'm going to close that up right now and then share the results.
That's great. So we've got about 94% people, maybe or yes, please, of the people who are on the call. So that helps us. Hope we'll keep our fingers crossed that we will have resources that would allow us to reconvene this TA team. I think we need like uniforms or like at least shirts with logos, sort of like, sort of a la the Geek Squad. So you, Kendra, would you work on that? So I just wanted to also make sure with our final slide, Karen, if you could put up that next slide. For those of you who don't know, the guidelines have recently been updated by ACL. It was a long process. We won't go into the details. We've had a couple webinars about how the ACL APS guidelines have been updated. But here's the link to the new version. It's graphically enhanced and hopefully more user-friendly. And we are also creating, and will be available soon, a brief, a 5-page brief that tells the user or what changed in the guidelines, so you don't have to do your own compare and contrast between the 2016 and the 2020 guidelines. So that brief is going to be out soon. That will give you a quick and handy guide to what changed in the guidelines. And I guess we're open for questions now. Oops, we may not have time for questions. Lori, Anna, what do you guys want to do? Karen?
We actually, let's see, there was one question about sharing the decision tree, which we said is going to be up soon. I think that's the only question we have. So okay. I think we're good.
All right, well, and then I think I will just say personally, it was really a pleasure to work with all of the states. It was a pleasure to work with NAFSA and Anna from New Additions. And Lori, let me turn it over to you for a final word.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes, this was one of the most fun things we've done, and it was really nice to be able to sit down and work through issues with each of the states. It was enlightening to see the decisions they have to make and how they were able to make them, and I think it was worthwhile all the way around. And thank you to all the states that worked with us. We really enjoyed doing it with you guys. If there are any additional questions, you can feel free to send them directly to me, and I'll make sure they go to the to any of the folks that you're specifically trying to address the questions to. But we'll handle that if you want to send them in.
And I think on the very final slide, you will find the email for Anna Leopold at New Additions.
Oh, good.
She is someone that if you have a question about the TA project, you can write directly to Anna, and she'll make sure it gets to whoever it needs to get to. So thank you, Anna, for playing that role. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And again, thank you to the states. It was a real pleasure to work with you and to see the work. And thanks to ACL for funding that project and for your leadership in creating the APS of tomorrow. Take care, everybody. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Happy Labor Day.